Afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Frank Goodyear, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's lecture. Before I introduce Elliot Bostwick Davis, I want to note that the museum will be opening next Tuesday. Why Draw? 500 Years of Watercolors and Drawings at Bowdoin College, a major exhibition of more than 100 works on paper from the museum's distinguished collection. Artist Natalie Frank, whose work is included in Why Draw, will present the exhibition's opening program here at Kresge at 4:30. And there will be a festive reception over at the museum and a chance to view the new exhibition directly afterwards. But today's program, Elliot Bostwick Davis is the John Moors Cabot Chair in the Art of the Americas Department at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. She is also a proud Bowdoin parent. Her son James is a first-year student, and so we're thrilled that she's here with us today. At an academic museum like the Bowdoin College Museum, faculty, students, and the museum's curatorial staff are always using its historic collections to think anew about noteworthy issues of the past, present, and sometimes even the future. As a curator, Dr. Davis has had much opportunity to think about how to present collections in a new light. In particular, she served as the leader of the curatorial team that reimagined how to tell the story of American art for the MFA's new Art of the Americas wing. As many of you know, the MFA has one of the most storied American collections in the United States. How to show their outstanding Copleys, Homers, and Sargents in a fresh manner was this distinct challenge. Her talk this afternoon will in part discuss how they approached it. Dr. Davis did her undergraduate work at Princeton and her graduate studies at NYU and Columbia. For 7 years, she worked in the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum before moving to Boston in 2001. Since the opening of the Art of the Americas wing in 2010, she has worked on a range of artists, including Mary Cassatt, Edgar Degas, and most recently, Jamie Wyeth. But today, her topic is the place of American art in an encyclopedic museum. Without further ado, please welcome Elliot Bostwick Davis.
Thank you, Frank, so much, and Anne and Caroline and our colleague who is a Bowdoin student as well, a senior, Catherine Sear, who was right outside my office all summer last summer. It's great to be here with all of you, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk with you about, I hope we deliver on museums of the future, but we'll see how far we get. And I just wanted to really think about the beginning of this wing and sort of how much has gone on. I love the fact that Frank called it the new wing because we're almost open 6 years now. But the first year we opened, we had about 1.7 million visitors come through the Art of the Americas wing. This was one of my favorite shots. This was from opening day to the public. It was the first free community day. That's our director, Malcolm Rogers, in the red jacket from what I called the Buckingham Palace balcony. He liked to have this balcony hovering over the courtyard for visitors, but if you do actually speak from that spot, it feels a little bit like you're, Eva Peron. I don't care for it very much. In any event, this was the beginning, and I would say that really it's been a great work in progress, and I'm here really with all of you as you rethink, I think, your own galleries and how you're going to be representing your own collections. It's really to enter this mix and this dialogue. So when we opened, one of the surprising things to me was that what was old was new again, and I'm showing you one of our second floor galleries that was installed in the manner specifically of how the MFA opened its doors in 1876. We had galleries that looked very much like this in the salon-style hang, which imitated the kind of salons that artists would have seen in the 19th century when they made the grand tour abroad. So in a way, this was a chance for us to capture some real estate, show some of our strengths in our 19th century, particularly landscapes and portraiture. But also, I called this, when we were working on it with our colleagues, a salon with purpose and maybe a brain, in the sense that we did organize it by generation. So these are artists on the left that had all traveled to Italy in the first generation. And the next slide you see here, these are many artists who had worked in Germany, Bierstadt, and here's Enninger and some others, Duveneck, and not so well known Selinger from Boston. But that was somewhat of a surprise. And I think tonight what we could do together is take a look at some of the things that we thought about and continue to evolve. And really the future will be this new pilot that I'd love you all to hear about that we're working on right now. So with that, the wing itself was actually on a piece of paper. It was a perimeter when I arrived in January of '01. That meant nothing had been decided about the curatorial program. We did have a certain space to work with, a certain footprint, but it was up to us to figure out how to do it. So it's really stacked up on 4 levels, and on 4 of those levels we have a center suite of galleries, and then on 2 of them we have side galleries that we'll see in a moment. And I think, in a way, it's such a huge collaboration with so many people. But we, in beginning this process, of course, think about our core collections and telling the story of the American Revolution in Boston, which can be told from so many perspectives. And since we began this work in January '01, I think the story of telling the story of the American Revolution has become far more complex. But I think we always felt that these center core galleries should really have objects and iconic objects that we would not want our visitors to miss. And those would be among them on this level, the first level, Paul Revere's portrait by our homegrown and born John Singleton Copley, who was self-taught, painted in 1768. And Revere is looking out on a bowl that he, in fact, created himself, the Liberty Bowl, commissioned by 15 of the Sons of Liberty in 1768. It's actually a very modest looking piece, because I think so many people are familiar with this shape of the bowl, but in fact it was a radical symbol of what these young patriots were up against in tackling and going to war against the greatest military power of the day. So their names are inscribed around the rim. And in fact, one of the signatures, I think, of the wing was that we could stack up many different kinds of objects in one space with these cases created by Alessandro Gopian, Museo Tecnico from Milan. But in thinking about the wing, what was, I think, really exciting for us was thinking about these core collections of Boston in a new context, in a new paradigm. And by that I mean opening up the possibility of thinking about them in the context of what was happening in New Spain. If we think of New England with Copley and with Revere, this gallery to the side opens up on the same floor adjacent to the space you just saw, a beginning of our collection around Spanish colonial art. And I do mean beginning because while the silver plaques that you see here against the wall were many of them in our collection, everything you see here, and actually not in the photo to the left, was acquired during the time of the creation of the wing. And in fact, this picture was taken after the wing opened, because this Cuban chest is not from Mexico. This portrait of the Archbishop of Mexico from 1754 is roughly contemporaneous with Paul Revere. But just to give you a feel for how these works are, in terms of how difficult it is for us to clear them for acquisition because of their provenance issues, we actually had to have several people, among them my good colleague Dennis Carr, but a number of colleagues in Art of Europe, working for over a year to actually create the research that would document this piece all the way back to the beginning. Because otherwise, if it's been taken out of a church or it's been exported improperly, we're not able to acquire it for the MFA. So we had a terrific team of people. This is our core group of Art of the Americas 10 curators that worked on the project. I'm not going to tell you who's photoshopped into that photo, but 2 people, because we were always running in lots of directions. In this case, I love this photo too. This was a group, this was in our courtyard about 10 days before we opened, and this was just really who was on hand. But we could have filled that courtyard probably 4 times over with people that had worked on this project. So very big, very complex, but I think that was one of the aspects of the richness of why we came up with the stories that we could tell in both simplified but in nuanced ways. One of the things I wanted to raise here was thinking about how we offer information about what we're doing in the galleries, and we're still working on that, and I'll bet everybody is. But we actually had what we considered about 7 different layers of information, and what do I mean by that? Well, we had, of course, text panels, and you see this woman reading one. We had audio guides that we piloted for the wing for both adults and children, so there were 2 separate guides. We had in-gallery touch screens. There were those inserted in different places. And we also had galleries that were called learning galleries. We had these on 2 of the levels on the eastern side of the building. And again, these were all pilots, really. And we had, here's a bigger touch table that was on the 20th century floor with a family working on it. And this was meant to be a big social table as opposed to the smaller one that you saw that's more of a video showing, let me just go back. This is a man looking at different techniques of furniture making that had been demonstrated by colleagues at the North Bennett Street School in Boston, showing people how to make dovetails or how to create inlay or gilding. And we did, of course, do a lot of different kinds of presentations in the wing. This was one of our deaf signage for the deaf in the galleries, which was really part of the effort to be accessible to all as part of the universal design. In addition to these things that you see, we also had, here's the handheld where you see we had adults and children's stops that we partnered with, actually WGBH, to do the children's stops. And we continue to update these audio guides that you pick up at the visitor center. So if you want to take those on, you can actually now follow tours for Latin American art, African American art, women artists, and different tours. We produced a publication which really thought about and presented the work we had been doing on Art of the Americas, and all of the members of the team had a byline in this. And we also launched, after the wing opened in 2012, the first MFA online publication, which included all of our paintings that were on view in the wing at the outset. So this is a subsequent layer even beyond what we had opened with. But I think, again, we're still continuing to evaluate how we present our labels, which voices are included in the museum, and I think that's something, again, a lot of museums are working with and thinking about as we are. So here's just you see a couple of pages from the online catalog, which is still accessible through our website, www.mfa.org. And I think since Frank mentioned the Wyeth show, we did have a nice grant, a sort of seed grant from the Wyeth Foundation to embark upon that project. So here we are again to just think about stacking up. I didn't mention really how we did that, but the foundation level was for ancient and Native American art, the indigenous Americans, and 17th century New England. Then we moved up to, you saw the Paul Revere and the Liberty Bowl, the 18th century, early 19th century collections through about the Federal period. The third level, level 2, third LG 1, 2, this one was for the bulk of our 19th century holdings, and the top was the 20th century. We had a large space to work with on that top floor, but we actually, in thinking about the wing, worked it from all angles, top to bottom, every side, every entry point, because it connected to the rest of the building on the other sides. So here you are when you would have entered the wing. I imagine a number of you have actually been there, which I hope you have. This is what you would be greeted with, these great quiche burial urns from about 750 AD. And here, the presentation, we had such depth in the Mayan collection. It's really one of the greatest collections outside of Guatemala of this material anywhere. Well, it is anywhere outside of Guatemala. So we could actually show you different aspects of Mayan culture thematically. In the gallery for Native American art, in that central spine, it was really a deliberate choice to emphasize the first Americans, and we tried to play off of the pottery, the ceramic you would have seen in the first space, in this second space. But this is a gallery very much in development. And we just had on Monday, and I'll say a bit more at the end about the pilot we're working on now with the Luce Foundation. Our first pilot will be dealing with Native American art around the time of the centennial. But we do have some Native voices around the table working with us, which I think is really exciting. And that's what we're going to be, as we think through how to really continue to use this space. We knew the collection was sporadic, and by that I mean the founders of our museum had collected Native American art from the beginning of our founding in 1870, feeling that it was an important, really for our artists in the nation to have these great models of Native American art from which to be inspired, as the school was part of our museum, the SMFA, now it's been sort of severed and now is part of Tufts, although it's in its same location. But the idea was that practicing artists would want to have the best of all the works of art from any culture and period in the world, and that would include Native American. But over time, it had actually been sent off site to our colleagues' museum at Harvard, the Peabody Museum for Ethnographic Presentations of Native American Art. And again, we're now in the process of bringing back, it turns out, about 600 objects were sent off site. We had no idea that many. In fact, we thought it was more about like 100. And in the process of working on it, we now realize more like 600. I wanted to show you this slide. This is Dennis Carr, a colleague in our department, working with a Native American artist, contemporary artist, Jeff Gibson, and he was performing. This is actually on level 3 with the Pollock bowl up on the top floor, and here's another view of it. In fact, it's Jeff Gibson purposely on a, looking like a psychiatrist couch, because he's unpacking his own response as a Native American artist working to Pollock. And Dennis was part of this as well. And it's just a way that we've been involving with performance art. We actually now have a curator, Liz Munsell, for performance art. And I did mention to some, as we were waiting for the talk this evening, that Liz with Dennis and another good colleague in our department who's just arrived in September, Leila Bermeo, they've opened something called Club Americano, which is on the second floor of the wing. It simulates the feel of a men's club, but actually everyone is welcome, and there are lots of surprises in there. Pablo Helguera put it together. He's Mexican. He's an educator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So you can actually all host, if you choose to, if you get in touch with Liz Munsell, an event of your own in Club Americano. It just opened on April 27th, so I hope you'll come with us and look at that. So since the wing had opened in 2010, we actually began the process of rethinking the top floor, and we've already now installed it. This was an interim installation of expressionism at mid-century, so we had artists like Mata working. He's a Chilean artist, but very much involved with international surrealism here. And then we included our group of very closely defined, meaning closely tied to Boston artists, the Boston Expressionists as they're known, Hyman Bloom. This is David Aronson in the middle, and at the right, Carl Zerbe. Carl Zerbe was head of the paintings department at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts for many years. His student was David Aronson there in the middle, who went off to teach as one of the heads of the painting department at BU. And Hyman Bloom, as a young teenager, had been a scholarship student initially, but then was trained at the SMFA as well, and represented the United States at the Venice Biennale of 1950. So interesting how the Boston Expressionists have somewhat dropped out of view, but in the time of their own time were actually quite significant. We included in this space other forms of expressionism, including the Mexican muralists. This is the West Coast ceramicist Peter Volkos, and this is an African-American artist, Norman Lewis, painting a work responding to atomic discoveries in that period. It's called Every Atom Glows, and I'm afraid you haven't seen it much out in the wing because it's constantly on request for loan. So it's been in actually about 2 or 3 shows since it appeared in this installation in 2012. And here I just wanted to show you the Siqueiros End of the World, which was on loan in our wing around that time after we opened around 2011-12 with the Volkos, with the Pollock bowl you see here, which is really almost not quite one of a kind, but we think probably about a half dozen of these bowls that Pollock painted on ceramic of these flaming figures survive. It's shown with the inspiration he actually had. This is a small oil by Orozco, the Mexican muralist, for the St. Alfonso orphanage, where he would have painted this in a large-scale mural, and that was the kind of thing Pollock was thinking about. Well, we're thrilled that the painting, which was on loan to us, the Siqueiros, ended up across the way when Harvard's galleries opened at the Harvard Art Museums. And I just brought this. I had shown a couple of views of their gallery with works on paper, but what I really wanted to note was how different it is when you're in a university museum, or perhaps even at Bowdoin, because this was the length of their label. And at the MFA Boston, as Catherine will know, we have about 75 words we're working with. So I just love the fact that, Harvard, you can be much more elaborate. And in fact, to me, it looks like you almost wrote the student's paper there on that one. But So be it. So this is how the top floor of the wing looked when we opened. We had Calder jewelry, we had David Smith sculpture, Helen Frankenthaler looking in there to a gallery about figurative art, we had more of a thematic presentation. Here's some more views. Here's Norman Lewis looking into the Stella, Pollock, Calder, and Franz Klein here. And here Joan Mitchell as it was evolving. And secondary installation with larger scale things to try it out in that space, and that's what's been a real work in progress, is to really think about what is going to do well in that 21-foot space. So we tried out some of the works we were able to use after our contemporary wing opened the year following on the Art of the Americas wing in 2011, and they were not using the Sean Scully or this Robert Mangold, and we were able to set up this large silhouette which has gone down now into our courtyard, and I'll show you at the end what we've done with this space yet again. So since 2010, it had this interim installation that I worked on in 2012. But meanwhile, we've also keep a good eye in the galleries for new acquisitions, because they're really coming in quite rapidly. This is a spectacular Tiffany lamp that was spearheaded by my colleague Noni Gadsden. It's one of the finest. It's called the Drophead Dragonfly. You can see the dragonflies here with this mosaic base. And it was a very long process to acquire this, because Noni did a tremendous amount of work on deaccessioning lesser objects, things that really had been still in our storerooms even after the wing. And reminding you that exhibitions continue to drive our process. This was looking into the design for Dennis Carr's really groundbreaking work on a project he worked on for about 7 or 8 years, depending on how you count, but Made in the Americas. It was opened at the MFA. It's in its little design box, as you see it here. It traveled to the Winterthur Museum, closing just I guess early January, so it's just coming back now. And we'll be bringing these loans into the Art of the Americas wing. So again, it'll keep shifting that first floor. Now, I brought along the American wing. As Frank mentioned, I began at the Metropolitan and spent 10 years there. And I used to actually, as a fellow when I was starting out, I gave tours in the American wing, not really anticipating ever ending up in the Art of the Americas wing at the MFA Boston, but because I found this building to be very confusing. And I felt that probably visitors that would find it confusing as well. The thinking had been that this was the branch bank facade, which was in Lower New York. It was dismantled and acquired by the Met. It dates from 1822. What's hard to tell from this image, if you see it there, and now the Engelhard Court, and it was only covered over to the out of doors in the 1980s. It had previously been open to the sky, so there would have been like a garden between the Met's building and this. So Central Park is here to the left of your slide, and the rest of the Met to the right. So the way they worked this American wing, which was the first of its kind in any U.S. museum, which opened in 1924, the 17th century collections you can't see, but they're buried here behind this part of the facade. And then as you move down through the building, the colonial collections were the rooms itself, the period rooms were carefully fitted on this level. And the final level, the courtyard level, was left for the federal period, the period that basically dated from the branch bank, so around 1825, so it would appear as though you were leaving that building. And now, don't worry that you can't read the next slide, but it just shows you this is behind the branch bank facade. This was filled with period rooms on 3 floors. And what the Met did when they opened their wing was put many, many galleries around it, a sort of whole suite of galleries. Well, we actually did something different at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, but it was very much influenced by my having spent a lot of time at the Met's wing. And I show you this one because this is an early set of models by our architects, Lord Foster and Partners of London. We worked with this central floor plate I mentioned, and we said we had these 2 gallery spaces on either side. They're separated by a 20-foot slot because we're on an earthquake fault in Boston, so the whole building was built for earthquake mitigation. But the reason I love this one is you see this yellow and the arrow going to these tables. That was where Foster and Partners wanted to put our kitchen. Well, that's exactly where you saw Paul Revere in the Liberty Bowl sitting in the early slides. So the kitchen eventually moved over here into this location, and we captured a gallery above it. But the central spine became very important for us and for thinking about these galleries, and the pavilions, we called the pavilions, these square spaces became where we put the period rooms. So essentially we sort of opened up and split open the way the Met's house of period rooms is set in the middle of lots of galleries here at the Art of the Americas wing. The period rooms are really at the outer edges. They're very important to the story of American museums, but more when they're augmented by galleries. And interestingly, I never really thought much about the inspiration of the gardener, but it turned out that the Met's American wing architects, Roche Dinkelo, actually were from New Haven, but mentioned that the courtyard at the Gardner Museum was his inspiration for the courtyard at the Engelhard Court, so that stacked appearance. In our case, the central spine, I felt Paul Klee, this is a mixed media work by Paul Klee from the late 30s. This was something that I had in mind as we were thinking about how to move people through this building. In other words, this is his painting, High Road and By Roads, where you see one slice through the painting, and you see, he was very interested in the golden section, you see divisions everywhere you go. The point was, if you had a short amount of time, you could traverse the center of the Art of the Americas wing, the Paul Revere, the Ancient Americas, the Salon that we saw on the first slide, and you would get the major icons and themes of 3,000 years of art. But if you wanted to take your own journey, wherever that led you in the wing, you could also be open to that. And I think as we all are a part of our time, as we were working on the wing, it's amazing to think that we began in 2001 January, and the iPhone didn't even exist, or neither did Twitter for that matter. But the point is that these kinds of thinking of branching but also opening up lots of different windows simultaneously is very much a way that we work today now with the advent, of course, of computer technology. So just bringing you back to the thinking of the central portal, we had this central portal and a variety of presentations of period rooms. This often gets forgotten in our project. We actually have 9 period rooms and spaces, a lot to deal with for the opening. But again, each one was thought of to be presented in a slightly different way. So the Manning house here that you're looking at, the frame was freed from the former wing where it was all filled in with plaster. And if you go up, you can almost see in this slide, you see the white line there. That's where the plaster would have all filled in there. And this was something that the African-American artist Fred Wilson, when he was coming through the wing, right after we opened, we were on a panel together, and he loved, particularly, he was very excited to see how sculptural the frame was. And the purpose was really to emphasize the tongue and groove or mortise and tenon construction there, which is the same construction that's used on the furniture of this period that's being shown beneath in the gallery, so that visitors, we hope, really get a feel for these artisans and architects coming from, many of them from England, trained in construction techniques there, and using that to create both furniture and buildings. Of course, when it was in the 1928 wing where it had been, before we moved it, it was shown with windows and doors, which was unfortunate because this was the second floor of a large, almost like a barn-like shed building. So if you'd taken a walk out one of those doors on the second floor, you surely would have killed yourself. But we used the openings as ways to frame and to really highlight for our visitors different shops, whether they be Plymouth, Mass, or Connecticut, and that's the way they're grouped. The more traditional type of period room setting is this type of setting, and we did end up bringing this forward into the wing with a lot of discussion with our educators because they did use this space quite a bit for their for the school group programs and interpretation. So we did have a bit of reinterpretation there. In fact, we learned as we installed it that in 1928 the whole frame had been installed backwards. And we learned that because this beam, which is hard to see but it goes across here, had all the smoke from the fireplace was on the wrong side. So as it was in the room about to get put down, I got this panic call from Dennis. He's like, "You got to come down right now." I said, "Really? What's the matter?" Well, it turned out they wanted to be sure before we really dropped it down that it was right. And I said, I think we're good. If the fireplace smoke is on the right side of the beam, I think we're good to move it 180 degrees. We did a lot of benchmarking, and that's why it's great to be here at Bowdoin, because so many colleagues helped us as we went around really the U.S. and the world to do this. This was a different type of period room setting. I call this the silk purse from the sow's ear, because we were given this fireplace surround from some wonderful donors, the Adelsons, who have ties to Boston. And this was actually in a home on Commonwealth Avenue owned by and created by Elizabeth Spooner. However, it was not of the highest quality nor of the greatest enthusiasm in terms of its reception by our decorative arts colleagues, because it's not, in terms of the aesthetic movement, and I can say this, it's not meant to be a derogatory slur, but it's really like the kind of setting you'd see in a Chinese restaurant. It's an envisioned setting of what they thought was sort of an Asian style setting with these ebony, this ebony detail. But I felt with the assemblage it would do well for us. I didn't know where, but it turned out we used our colleagues' installations at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris, where they had a lacquer installation that we felt would be something that we could use to think about how to install this one. And we were fortunate enough to find, really, I think in the last 6 months before we opened, this painting by John Humphreys Johnston. It was in New York over a fireplace at a gallery, and we had just done the press preview in New York. Malcolm and I were there, pouring rain, and I said, well, Malcolm, you better come with me on the appointments because we're never going to get two cabs. So we did. He saw this, and he kept asking me about it, and I was sort of putting it off because I felt we were really in need of 20th century things. And then I turned to my good colleague, Noni Gast, and I said, Noni, what's the dimension of that fireplace down on the second floor in the aesthetic gallery? Well, it turned out this painting fit perfectly with just the minor addition of a little bit on the side and a little bit on the top. It had lost its frame because it had been left by Johnson in Paris. He was good friends with Sargent and Whistler and all the expatriates working there in the late 19th century. And guess what? She was actually looking at ebonized furniture, which was what we had put around here. So I always feel that sometimes these objects have a mind of their own, maybe even beyond what we envision for them, but they know where they want to be. So there they go. So again, since the wing opened, we did have several installations of light-sensitive works of art on the LG level, the foundation level. We had schoolgirl needlework, 3 rotations for 6 months each. In this gallery, the second floor gallery, we had works on paper from the 19th century, and on the top floor we had photography. So as those installations, we refreshed those for, as I said, the first 18 months, and after that we took on new themes and topics. So the first woman, well actually the first artist of any kind to have a mini retrospective in the Art of the Americas wing was this artist. This is Lois Jones. She was born in Boston in 1905. She was African American. She graduated from our school in 1927 with every award she could have possibly won. And she went to the dean hoping to find a position for herself as a painter, teaching painting, so that she could also support herself as a painter beyond her life during the day. And she was told at that time by the dean that she needed to go south to help her people. Her people happened to be in Boston. Her father and mother were both Boston-born. But she did go south, briefly teaching in South Carolina, but then finding a wonderful position at Howard University, where she ended up teaching for 47 years. Well, amazingly, Lois left us 19 works and funds for a scholarship at the school of the museum. And so we felt strongly that she would be the right person to really honor initially. So this gallery, this Shapiro Gallery, at the time, I call myself really the utility player at the MFA Boston because I stepped up to do this. Other colleagues were busy doing other things, and I'm so glad I did because I learned so much about her work. This whole wall of her early work was really inspired directly by the collections at the MFA Boston. She'd been in the textile side of the school, so she did study a lot of our textiles. In fact, this was a Chinese skirt that she rendered in watercolor above there. And these are all, you can see them at the museum if you come to our print room. This whole wall was really about her efforts to illustrate children's books with young African-American models in them, and she did this while she was at Howard, so this really was all about her work at Howard. And the wall here along this side was about her life in Paris. In 1937, her world opened up when she had a fellowship to study abroad, and I think you saw a bit of this last wall. At the age of 70, she was able to finally travel to Africa and produce these great works inspired by Africa here. And even in incorporating African sculpture in this work, she's even thinking back, and this figure in the center is La Baker. It's actually based on her early experience in Boston of seeing Josephine Baker perform. But what I learned and loved about this gallery was the fact that the four walls were very intimate, but actually helped our visitors leave empowered, I think, because it encouraged slow looking, which I know is a term lots of people are thinking about. But it really, to me, was demonstrated very clearly in this space. So we're taking over this space. It's currently the Club Americano, but we're going to be taking it over for the Loose Pilot. I want to show you a later iteration of it. This was a show of American ceramics from the arts and crafts period up to contemporary ceramics, curated by three of our colleagues, two in Art of the Americas, one in contemporary, Noni Gadsden, Caroline Cole, and Emily Zilber. And here they use the three walls quite dramatically to tell the story of ceramics across this table that really surrounded you as if you were to stand inside. This gallery is about 750 square feet, so it's not large, but you can come out feeling as though you've understood the story. Well, we're in Maine, so I did want to show that every gallery I work on and every project I work on is always an experiment for me. This is the Jamie Wyeth show, where we actually inserted a film of Jamie painting one of the paintings in the show. It's called Inferno Monhegan from 2006. And it turned out when we later, with our Visitors Services Department, they did a lot of piloted sort of how to responses from our visitors. I'm not coming up with the right word, but basically replies to different aspects of the show. After saying that they wanted to see more work by Jamie Wyeth, the number one thing they said was they thought the film was the most important thing in the show, one of the most important parts of the interpretation, which told us that we've now used more and more film of artists actually at work. I think if Jamie knew it took about maybe 100 hours to talk to colleagues to actually get this film in the show, he probably would be mortified. But in any event, at a big place like ours, you know, everybody has a different point of view, and film and, you know, showing a film in a smaller gallery was kind of unheard of. I thank so much Bowdoin for having the Homer mannequins that Jamie was fascinated by. They are pictured, they're here in the collection at Bowdoin College, and I've seen them here. These are two small scale tableaux vivants. They're about 42 inches wide. The scale is 1 inch to a foot. Jamie was thinking about these Homer mannequins that Homer used when he was in Teignmouth, England, actually setting up scenes for himself. They're dressed as though they're color coats, fisherwomen. I should have brought along a slide. But he actually posed them in his backyard, his walled garden, and then painted, it seemed much to the amazement of the local fisher folk, these pictures out of doors quite rapidly, but it's because he'd experimented in miniature. So again, another kind of pilot that our public responded to overwhelmingly positively. They loved these tableaux vivants, as I did. And I think one of the real takeaways that was fascinating about the wing is that our visitorship by children jumped almost 50%. This is a class at a charter school south of Boston in Hingham being taught by a woman named Avis Goldstein. And this is a painting by an artist, Latin American artist who worked in Argentina. He's now based in Madrid, Cesar Paternoster, and it's called Staccato. And those stripes, which are very much inspired by ancient American textile colors and patterns and geometries, that bulge is forming the staccato. That is the beat that's within a musical phrase to really give it structure. And what Avis had them doing was painting watercolors. They were here sculpting the staccato in Sculpey clay, and when they were in our galleries, they were actually dancing to this piece. And our artist, who's alive, Cesar, couldn't be happier that it had this much play in that case. All right, I'm going to make a bit of a wrap. It's skipping ahead. I think you've seen these in terms of pairing the north and south, so New England with New Spain, so that's north, central, and south. But the reason I did show New World Imagine is much of the work we did in that publication was actually thinking still about the East and West and the impact of the old world of Greece, Rome, and Egypt, as well as Europe on our collections. And I just wanted to bring along what has been the most recent innovation of the Art of the Americas wing and thinking about the future. This is a new pilot as well. It opened last July, and thanks to Catherine Sear, who's here, she did a lot of work on making sure we had all these changes, 125 changes to this floor registered for our audit that goes on every mid-July for us. And why was this different? Well, basically what we were doing was we were looking internally at our own collection and trying to figure out how we could pull out an exhibition that would be really seemingly new. And with our new director now, Matthew Teitelbaum at the helm, this was a way to think instead of thinking so much North, Central, and South America, so essentially hemispherically, we were now going to be thinking much more East and West. So I was in charge of this cross-departmental team. We had colleagues from Art of Europe, works on paper, our head interpreter, Adam Tessier, and Keith Crippen, who worked on all of the plans for the wing. We worked really hand in glove for about 10 years. And what we came up with was, at the outset, this is hashtag Matthew Teitelbaum, because you can follow him. He was on Twitter as we were putting the gallery together. Pollock and Picasso facing off, and we had a gallery dedicated to Hoffman, the second generation of German expressionists. But essentially, it was really looking at the immigrants to the New World and thinking about their experience around early modernism in different parts of the world. So not just in New York, in this case, Joseph Stella, our great modernists in the Lane collection, like O'Keeffe, you see here, as well as Arthur Dove, all part of the Stieglitz Circle. Here you see the films integrated into Pollock and Picasso, where they were both in 1950, and you can see these in our galleries. You can also see them on YouTube. They're painting on glass, both Pollock and Picasso, within a year of each other in the 50s. And these were the kinds of relationships we were setting up for you to explore in the galleries, which are still up there. They'll be this way, we expect, until June of 2018. Here's some more views of the Pollock and Picasso. Here you see some of the African-American artists we integrated into the 20s and 30s gallery. And we also created a gallery highlighting our new acquisition, Dos Mulheres, which came to the museum we acquired in 2016 December. This is one of our colleagues doing a Facebook Live feed, which has been very interesting for us. We use this in all of our departments. But as this was happening in real time, we had 26,000 people accessing this talk that I was giving. I wasn't aware of it, but what I mean is we were wired for sound, and it was on Facebook Live, but it's amazing that that many people, I think, could be on one gallery talk that quickly. So I highly recommend it. We did do a space in this installation for looking at German expressionists, and here we have two portraits by Max Beckmann, of one of our former director, Perry Rathbone, and his wife, with a number of the Boston expressionists like Jack Levine that you see there, as well as you saw earlier Hyman Bloom and Zerbe. Here's Perry Rathbone juxtaposed with Marsden Hartley, which will be coming nearby to all of you next summer. It's, other Hartleys from our collection. This one's going to the National Gallery, but you'll see a number of our other Hartleys in the Hartley in Maine show that will be at the Colby College Museum this July. But before I finish and we open it up for all of your questions, I wanted to let you know that we're really continuing to innovate at the Art of the Americas, and we really welcome all of you to be part of that. Right now, as I mentioned, we have an opportunity. We're the only museum in the nation that has been given a responsive grant that will hope to set the pace for future grants that the Luce Foundation of American Art will give in terms of thinking about new ways and innovative ways to present American art. So all of us last summer did a great deal of brainstorming and thinking about how to best utilize this opportunity. And the parameters of the Luce Foundation were to think about our own collections, so it had to be part of our permanent collection, had to be underutilized, and we are hoping to present it in new and innovative ways. So what we came up with were a series of 3 pilots. They're 1-year exhibitions each, but in our case, they will all intersect from 1876 right up through 1955, and they'll be in successive years. The first one, I think I alluded to, is around Native American art. All these works are from our collection, but looking at Native American art in terms of how it intersects with the nation's centennial. This is a recently acquired work in our permanent collection that hasn't been out on view. The Progress Vase from 1876 was actually made in Taunton, Mass. by Reed and Barton. And we've been thinking about the kinds of Native American art that was actually also made in Taunton, Mass, by the Wampanoag, and can we put these side by side? But more often, what we think about around the centennial artists like these, we have Winslow Homer, The Boys in a Pasture, one of the icons of our collection, and maybe lesser known, but certainly well associated with Boston. This one is William Morris Hunt. It's called Haying by Oxen. It's actually dated to 1876 because as it was cleaned for the opening of the wing, and you can see on this hillside, this is the American flag there, the flag with the stripes streaming there in the in this sunrise that's happening behind the figures. So this pilot one will look at thinking about Native American art at the time of the centennial. The second one is all about art and design, and the first one I should have mentioned, spearheaded by Dennis Carr. The second one by Noni Gadsden will be looking at art and design between the world wars, and what happens when we put icons like the Schreckengoss bowl against the copy of the Liberty Bowl from the Colonial Revival, or this Maria Martinez, black figure vessel in terms of her work of the 1920s. And so we'll be thinking about how to complicate the narrative that usually drives towards modernism or streamline, and think about women artists. We have more of them that we'll be showing in this context, so artists like Polly Thayer or Marie Zimmerman in this Egyptian-style box, or what happens when we place the regionalist style of this period on the left, Curry, with an African-American artist, Hale Woodruff, working in the South. This is called Big Wind in Georgia. The final pilot, it takes on complicating counter-narratives to the 1945-55 period, which is generally thought of as the, quote, triumph of abstract expressionism, looking at Hartley's Black Duck, which was painted here in Maine, because this was part of the MFA's provisional collection. It was a collection that the trustees set up for contemporary art. So the MFA, as you see, Hartley painted it 40-41, and the MFA purchased it as contemporary art in 1943. So this one, spearheaded by my colleague Erica Hirschler, thinking about other artists such as this one by Carl Hall, which was a stellar, it was a sort of standout in the MoMA show about Romanticism in the 1940s. It's not a name that's really a household name today. And Erica will also be thinking about how the Boston Expressionists fit into this period, and we hope that for other museums and collections that thinking about regional strengths will be one of the ways that this pilot will contribute. And also innovating as part of the pilot are the programs, and the consideration for programs will be part of it from the start. This is a program that colleagues in Art of the Americas work with actors. Here's Leila Bermeo talking about the Copley, Watson, and the Shark. This was based on the Hamilton program, sold out in various versions at the MFA, and we'll be thinking about similarly innovative programs. And that's the last slide. I had one more slide that was in our presentation the other night because it was all about the metrics, which is the part I'll be spearheading, and that one was 3 banners on the front of the MFA, which read, Ancient Egyptian Impressionist Gold Cats. And why? Well, because we know that's what drives foot traffic, but we're not looking at the metrics for that. We're actually looking for what museums can do to change people's perspectives and to help humans thrive. This is part of a whole new set of scholarship. It's called positive organizational scholarship. It's called social return on investment for some people. It's an amalgam, and I think our metrics will be an amalgam of neuroscience, cognitive psychology, this positive organizational scholarship, and anything else we may need to develop it. So we hope you'll be with us to experiment, and we welcome you back to our galleries for our programs in the meantime, including Club Americano. And with that, I thank you for being such a great audience on the afternoon on a misty day here in Maine, and I hope you'll have more questions for me and all of us to work with. So thank you so much. And I think we have some microphones. Did we stun you into silence? Let's see, there's one brave soul.
I'm interested not only in the liveliness of the modern art creation that you've made, but I'm wondering if other departments of the MFA are as lively. Particularly, I'm thinking of the classics department.
Yes, good question. Meaning, well, I think with our new director, it's hard to tell. We're just about to launch our strategic plan. In fact, it goes to the board, I think, this afternoon as we're here all together. The board should be taking on that. But Malcolm Rogers always used to say that really, in a way, the Art of the Americas wing was just the beginning of really a way to raise the bar for all of the collections. And as you know, we do have one of the finest ancient collections for Egypt, Greece, and Rome anywhere in the nation. And so I do know that my colleagues are working hard to open up galleries there in the ancient wing sequentially as the funds come on board to endow those. So they're working on daily life in ancient Greece. That's going to be the next one, and I believe that's going to open in September. But if you haven't been back in a while there, you'll know that there have been several that have already opened. The gallery dedicated to Homer has opened. There's a gallery for jewelry that's quite fantastic, and one for coins. So there have been some modifications and renovation and new installations within the ancient galleries. Does that answer your question?
In part.
Okay.
I've got
another part.
A little
Okay.
bit more here.
A little bit more.
I've been riding this horse for a while, and I don't know whether I'll live to see it win the race. But Bowdoin has an outstanding collection given by a Westbrook family. Ned Warren, thank you. And I know that the Boston Fine Arts has a parallel, probably larger collection.
And what's in the collection here that you're?
Antiquities, Edward Perry.
Okay.
Ned Warren.
And the collection here is certainly outstanding, but my understanding is from reading about Warren and the gift was that there was material in the collection at the time it was given that was not considered suitable for public display. I think a blockbuster Warren edition exhibition now might be something that could be contemplated between.
Well, we always love collaborating with all of our friends. So keep on that horse.
Okay.
And I would say that it's true that a lot of the, often archaeological material, lots of the Schwabtes that we have in the collection or shards are, of interest to scholars and not always as much in the display side. But they're still in our holdings as well because we have one of the very old, certainly in the Egyptian side, very old collections in the nation. So I'm not sure if they were Egyptian antiquities or Greek or Roman, but Greek and Roman. So I think come back in September and we'll talk to our colleagues over there, Rita Fried and my counterpart over in the ancient world, and see what message I can bear back to Boston for you. You're welcome. Yes, right here.
Thanks for that great talk, so interesting.
Oh, you're
so
welcome.
much of our world today, we're used to flipping through images on our iPhone and on the internet, and I'm wondering if any of your initiatives have confronted and really tried to challenge visitors to slow down and engage in really deep and thoughtful looking.
Definitely, great question. And yes, that gallery of Lois Jones, I think because it really surrounds you, it ensconces you. I think that is one reason you're almost separated from the rest. There's no gallery right next to it. And I think I mentioned when you saw where the kitchen was, we captured that gallery where Lois Jones and where the ceramics show and where the pilots will be over the kitchen. And initially it was separate from the wing and it seemed like a challenge. But in fact, it became one of its best assets because it's got one door in and one door out. So in terms of the slow looking, to your question there, in working with these pilots, we actually do have funds to build the metrics. And so I'm working with a number of colleagues across the country. I'm happy if you know of any to continue to add them to our list. But in terms of our own Department of Education and Planning and Evaluation, Lynn Courtney, who heads that up, number one on her list and their list as their whole department is slow looking. And so we are thinking that the best way to attack this would be then in the first pilot to add the metrics around. We'll do a, believe it or not, very low-tech pencil and paper questioning, which can always be done on an iPad or anything else down the road. But we will actually seek to test the slow looking. And by that I mean we may end up doing it with Google Glass, we may do it a variety of ways, but we have some colleagues at the Harvard Medical School, particularly Marge Livingstone, and if you don't know her book, Art and Vision, I highly recommend it to you. She writes for a general audience, but she's about a stone's throw from the MFA Boston. She's been doing work for her whole career on vision and has done some very interesting things, and she does present to art museum audiences very well. I heard her speak at Worcester. But when you go to her lab, her lab is filled with adolescent monkeys that she has there, that she raises, and they are all playing video games because she is studying the effect of their vision and how that affects their brain as they play video games. It's quite astounding to see a room as big as this filled with little monkeys playing video games. But it's one of the surprises of working on this side of the metrics. So we'll keep that in mind for the first one, and we'll let you know if you have any good leads. Please let us know. Thanks for your question. Oh, yes, please. Here comes a microphone for you.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
But I miss the magazine, the museum magazine.
Oh, the preview magazine.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
I just think a great deal is lost as far as having you become excited about what's coming. And
I will bring that back to Boston.
Good. What
Yes,
is the reason?
I think it was
do
our number one. Our members loved the preview magazine.
Right.
And I would say that, we're all visual and we're busy people, so to get on the website and figure out when the programs are happening is often a bridge too far. So we have learned the hard way, which is that, or I should say all the departments at the museum, including us who present the programs, that it's hard for people to access and get online for the programs, and so the programs attendance has been, a bit sluggish because of that. So we all feel it. I mean, as hard as it was to maybe write at the spur of the moment, we always, had all our colleagues in marketing saying, I just need a little blurb, maybe 400 words, 500 words, and when you're running out the door. But on the other hand, we knew what reach it had, and for people, it was really their number one source of getting information. So thank you. But unfortunately, we have moved so much into everything being loaded on the website. It's just hard to find. Or if you want to just tear it out and have your calendar because you're visual on your refrigerator, that you're not able to do. So we should figure out a way to print that easily for everybody.
Is there a chance that it might come back or in some form?
I don't think there's a chance it's going to come back, only because what happened was it was the expense of producing it, and they moved to one that had ads, if you recall, for luxury goods. And the feeling was that was very counter to the kind of museum we were hoping to be, that was inclusive for all, that somehow our preview magazine had all these ads for expensive cars, watches, and who knows what all jewelry. But yet we were saying we have to be what we say we want to be, which is a museum for everyone. So that was also part of the reason it was pushed out. But if some funder comes along and would like to continue to fund it for us, I'm sure we'd be happy to produce it. But now we do sort of one-off mailings, and that's how it goes for the moment. But I will definitely take your words back, because I know that they're right in line. Yes, right next to you.
I was really knocked out by the slide that had the Maria Martinez bowl and the Liberty bowl and another bowl that
The
I'm not...
Schreckengast, right? The
not
jazz bowl, it's called.
Yes. And I would just love to see a show of bowls.
Really? Fantastic. Well, that's
Really.
great to know for the pilot. I'll tell Noni that. The decorative art, so it'll be art and design. It will be three-dimensional and two-dimensional. We've tried hard to create the pilots with the 3D, 2D, if we can. The one that you saw on the last one that Erica's working on is primarily paintings and works on paper and probably some sculpture. So that one will have a more paintings focus. But I'm so glad you liked hearing about the bowls, because we have thought about doing a audio guide tour on bowls, because we could start, of course, with ancient Americas and move through the Liberty Bowl and the Jazz Bowl. So we can do lots of things this way, like we can do bedrooms, or we can do, we have talks on chocolate, throughout. So there are lots of subjects that bring people through all the different floors that they can follow through, which is fun. Thank you. A couple more. Up to you. Who goes next? Oh, one over here, and then we got two, one far and one in the middle there. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Could you talk a bit about the MFA's Heritage Fund and some of the opportunities and challenges that's offered in diversifying the collection?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked about that. Yes, so the Heritage Fund was the initiative of various board-level initiatives around diversity when I first arrived in 2001. And out of those discussions came the initiative to really create a collection with greater diversity. Well, when I arrived at the MFA, it had always been one of my priorities. The collection had a very small, maybe a handful of decorative arts by artists of color in the Art of the Americas, and it had 3 oil paintings that were in our care, meaning that doesn't count the contemporary. And one of those was on board, which means we can't hang it because it's on a paper support, and that was the Jacob Lawrence. So for us to say that we're one of the foremost museums in the nation and to have 3 paintings by African Americans in the Art of the Americas is just unacceptable. So fortunately for us, the Heritage Fund came online at the exact right time. And I'm asked a lot about this. I would recommend to you our Commonwealth book, Art by African Americans from 2014, because there we really do lay out the whole process from Barry Gaither, who wrote about his work. He was a curator at the MFA and now head of the National Center of Afro-American Art. And then the piece that was between when Barry left to become head of the National Center, I wrote the piece that really bridged the two. But I can tell you it was a challenge at the outset to bring in works by African American artists to the Collections Committee, because for many of the people around the table, the board table, they'd never heard of these artists. So we got, I realized that. I got knocked down a couple times with a couple of artists, and then I realized, well, that strategy wasn't working. We needed a different strategy. So in that case, we had the good luck to be connected with George Wean. He was born in Boston. He founded the Newport Jazz Festival. He and his late wife, Joyce, who was African American, had a show of work at the Boston University Art Gallery, and I went to go see it. I didn't know George, and I didn't know his wife had just died, but I cold called him, and he was in New York City, and I explained that we were building the wing. This was around 2006, and we'd been working on the African American collection for about 5 years at that point. And George, with his wife's death, had wanted to fund a foundation, which was going to support causes that they had been involved with, the Studio Museum in Harlem, obviously Newport Jazz, and some others. And so he gave us the gift of time, which was to select works that would be really meaningful for our collection. And we were able to select out of his holdings, he'd been collecting with Joyce since the 1980s, 7 works. So when you bring 7 works to the Collections Committee, it's hard for them to knock down the whole group. And that's what the strategy was. So that was really the wedge in. George ended up giving us, so we ended up acquiring work by James Richmond Barthé, Elzier Cortor, 2 Boston artists, John Wilson and Alan Rowan Crite, and our first work by Wilfredo Lam, which we're really happy to have as well. So a number of things, and again, that was the beginning. And as a result, that was early 2007. We made that purchase in January, and then soon thereafter, the markets crashed in 2008. And I think you saw in one of the slides the Norman Lewis at the top floor. It's sort of a lavender-looking abstract painting. That was on the cover of an auction catalog at Swan. And for us, fortunately, because we've been looking for a Lewis, the auction was 3 days after the market crashed. So we were in the offices in Art of the Americas. I was actually bidding on it, and I remember thinking, I certainly hope we get this one, because we'd lost out on a Lewis before. And we got it, unfortunately, and we had enough for it, but we set a record. Now, we don't like to set records necessarily for the Collections Committee, but we did set a record for any work ever at auction by an African-American artist that was an abstract work. So I think we're now known well that we have one of the, I think of it as sort of the 3rd best in the nation. I mean, I think it's hard to argue that my good colleague and former colleague, Lowry Sims, whom I worked with at the Met, she built a tremendous collection there, so I would consider theirs to be the first. Probably the second would be maybe the Smithsonian Museum of American Art. And I like to think of we're in the next tier down with Brooklyn, with Chicago. But I think MFA, we've really now jumped up to be one of the best in all media. So thanks for your question. And we still use the Heritage Fund for artists broadly. I mean, initially it was focused on artists of color, but it's artists that represent diversity. So sometimes we've acquired Mexican, American, Latino American, variety of different acquisitions, and not just by our department, by all the departments. So contemporary textiles, works on paper, musical instruments, we all acquire. I think that we had 2 others, and then maybe we'll see how much more. Yes.
I'm sure everyone here is very well aware of the dangers we're facing because the NEA may be losing funding. Does the museum have anything that you are doing to try to prevent that from happening?
Well, our director, with the other directors in Boston, Jill Medvedow and Peggy Fogelman, so at the ICA and at the Gardner Museum, wrote together a letter that went out publicly. We actually don't get a huge amount of funds ourselves from government funds, and the MFA has always been in that case. But for the Art of the Americas wing, we did get 2 very big We the People grants to do the main installation on that floor. And one-off exhibitions like the Made in the Americas have received NEH grants. But I would say that of our total support, it's a very small percentage. Fortunately for us, we're not dependent on it the way many institutions are dependent on the NEH, the NEA, and the IMLS grants, which are the other ones that are often very sought after for smaller museums. So we're well aware of it, and then colleagues are also out there advocating, and I'm about to finish up 2 terms at the Mass Humanities, and we do our own, for the humanities side, of course, because it's the NEH, we do our own advocacy there personally, and that sort of thing. So thank you. I think we had one back here.
I had a question about the beginning, the opening, but just as an add-on, I think that those of you who are members of the MFA would have gotten Matthew's letter because he did put it on all members that he had emails of, and he also put it in the Globe. And the other directors of museums, I think pretty much across the nation, put letters into their local papers. Oh, the Boston Globe, the New York Times, Tom did. It was a lot of backing, but I think we need a lot more if we're going to have our president support the NEH. But I'd like to go back to opening day on opening week, just for a moment, because you showed Malcolm giving his welcome to all of the crowds. The crowds were enormous. And I just wanted to suggest as a past docent that our group was out in force. And instead of attempting to bring the crowds through the opening of the wing, we had members at each of the important galleries. And it was, for me, one of the first times that I really got the reaction of a slow, because we had at least a half an hour to explain the particular item, the piece of work that we were showing to the public in the new wing. And I look at that as something that docents can do that you can't do with tapes or anything else. Get reactions and have people continue to look.
That's great.
And look again, as our print collectors say. And we really do a lot of that here. Our students are terrific about being docents. So thank you very much for a lovely afternoon.
Well, thank you for coming and for all you did to give tours. It was quite an astounding, exciting time. And we were actually following, since we were in the galleries like you, installing for 10 months, we never had that experience of walking in to see what it would be like. But it was fascinating. We did have online responses through our members office, as you may remember. Anybody who wanted to leave remarks could if they chose to. And Lisa Krasner, who's now at the Met, head of their membership, was in charge of all this. So I was fascinated and sort of glued to the blogs, meaning the sort of email lists that were coming at us in live time, because it was just really interesting to see how others were absorbing the wing, which was really exciting. We didn't expect it in some of the VIP tours, and I'm not kidding you. We had people in tears. I mean, it was amazing. They'd waited, like 20 some odd years for this to happen, and so I think quite unexpectedly we had a few really dramatic reactions of people, but it was exciting, very exciting. So thank you for being there in person.
The other thing that came about, and I think interesting to mention, but as in any new construction, there were things that needed to be looked at more carefully. And I do remember a woman in a wheelchair couldn't get out of the central core to go around to the bathrooms, and that was quickly taken care of. But it was interesting because there was somebody who was listening to all of the things that needed to be looked at again and again and again, which always happens in new building.
Definitely,
but
definitely.
Enough.
Well, thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. My pleasure.